There are people who move through life half awake, breathing, talking, working, but not seeing. They live inside a fog of noise, addicted to distraction, terrified of silence. They call this normal, they call it reality. But every so often, someone begins to notice what others can't. It doesn't happen loudly. It begins as a quiet unease, a subtle awareness that something about this world feels off, like you've woken up inside a dream that everyone else mistakes for life. That's the beginning of real perception. The moment your eyes start to adjust to the truth behind appearances. Carl Jung once wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." Most people never make that leap. They remain prisoners of repetition, reacting, performing, conforming, without ever asking, who decided this was living? But when you begin to see what others cannot, the world stops being familiar. The masks begin to slip, the games become visible. You start to see the machinery behind the illusion. The first sign is simple, but life-changing. You can feel when something isn't real. You can sense the vibration of truth beneath the surface of words. You no longer take things at face value, not because you are cynical, but because you've learned that everything false carries a frequency of tension. You notice how people speak from scripts, how most conversations are defense mechanisms wrapped in politeness. You can feel when energy doesn't match language. Someone says, "I'm fine," but their tone fractures under the weight of unspoken emotion. You can feel it before they finish their sentence. This awareness isolates you at first. You wish you could unsee it to go back to the comfort of ignorance. But you can't, because the gift of perception is irreversible. Once your intuition sharpens, life becomes a study in subtext. You stop reacting to what's said and start responding to what's meant. You begin to understand that most people wear their pain as personality. They don't mean to lie, they simply don't know who they are beneath the mask. Then comes the second sign. You begin to detach from drama. The same stories that once consumed you now bore you. Gossip feels poisonous. Conflict feels heavy. You can see the cycles people repeat, the endless loops of blame, projection, and self-pity, and you no longer want to play the part. You realize that most human suffering is self-created. The mind clinging to control, replaying fear, feeding its own wounds. At this point, people may accuse you of not caring, but it isn't apathy, it's clarity. You've stopped confusing chaos with depth. You've stopped mistaking emotional turbulence for connection. You see that peace isn't passive, it's power restrained. The world calls it detachment, but it's really discernment. The ability to hold space without losing center. The third sign emerges quietly. You start craving solitude instead of stimulation. You no longer fear your own company. In fact, you prefer it. Solitude becomes your sanctuary, not an escape, but a return. You realize how rare silence is in a world addicted to noise. And when you finally taste it, you begin to hear things others can't. The subtle movements of your own soul, the language of intuition, the voice of something ancient whispering direction without words. Jung understood this intimately. He spent years studying what he called the collective unconscious, the inherited psychic field of humanity. Most people live trapped within it, slaves to the collective noise. But those who begin to awaken detach from that field. They stop being antennas for the collective chaos and become transmitters of consciousness. In silence, they tune into frequencies the masses can't perceive: insight, intuition, synchronicity. You begin to notice patterns that others miss. Repetition in your life stops feeling random. The same lessons, the same dynamics, the same archetypes appear until you integrate their meaning. You start to recognize life as feedback, not punishment, not coincidence, but instruction. Every event becomes a mirror. Every person becomes a reflection of your inner landscape. And this brings the fourth sign. You can see people's motives without their confession. Their words become irrelevant. You read intention the way a musician reads rhythm. You feel deception before it's spoken. You sense hidden insecurity behind arrogance, hidden longing behind anger. You realize that humans don't speak truth, they act it out, and those actions become your language. This perception is dangerous because it strips away illusion not just about others but about yourself. You start to see your own manipulations, your own projections, your own self-deceptions. You realize that truth is not a weapon to expose others, but a mirror to refine yourself. This is where most turn back, because true sight demands self-confrontation. If you continue, the fifth sign reveals itself. You begin to experience synchronicity. Reality starts to mirror your internal state with eerie precision. Thoughts manifest as symbols. Emotions echo in external events. You think of someone, and they appear. You dream of something, and it unfolds days later. It's not coincidence, it's coherence. When your inner world aligns, the outer begins to respond. Jung called this a causal connectedness. Modern minds call it chance, but those who've seen it know better. The universe is not random, it is reflective. It's a hologram of consciousness. When you reach a certain level of awareness, life stops being linear and becomes symbolic. You no longer ask, why is this happening to me? You ask, what is this showing me? That question changes everything. The sixth sign appears in your emotional landscape. You start to feel both more and less. Your empathy deepens, but your reactions fade. You can feel pain in others as if it were your own, yet you do not drown in it. You feel love without clinging, grief without despair, anger without destruction. Emotion no longer controls you, it informs you. You have learned to alchemize feeling into understanding. It's as if the heart itself becomes an instrument of perception. You no longer use logic to interpret life. You use awareness. You feel your way through existence, guided by something older than intellect, the soul's intelligence. You stop chasing happiness and start seeking alignment. Because alignment feels better than happiness, it lasts longer. It's not a mood, it's a state of being. Then comes the seventh sign, the most difficult and the most liberating. You begin to see the collective dream for what it is. You look around and realize that most people aren't thinking, they're repeating, they aren't choosing, they're obeying. You start to see how society runs on programming. Fear disguised as morality, distraction disguised as freedom, ego disguised as purpose. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. This is the moment Jung called the confrontation with the self. When you awaken from the collective hypnosis, you face the vastness of your own consciousness. It's both exhilarating and terrifying. You understand that you've been asleep your whole life, living according to borrowed values, inherited fears, imposed beliefs. But now, the veil has lifted. You see that the matrix was never out there, it was in the mind. And that realization changes everything. You no longer move like a pawn in someone else's game. You stop chasing approval from systems designed to keep you small. You start making decisions from the quiet authority of your own inner truth. That is what terrifies the unconscious, an individual who can no longer be manipulated through fear. You become untouchable, not because life stops testing you, but because you no longer interpret tests as threats. You meet difficulty as dialogue. You meet pain as teacher. You meet solitude as sacred ground. This is the final stage of perception when seeing turns into being. Now you walk differently. You see differently. You speak differently. The energy around you shifts because you no longer participate in delusion. People feel it before they understand it, the gravity of someone who is awake. Your calmness becomes a mirror that exposes the chaos in others. Your silence becomes a challenge to those addicted to noise. And yet, this awareness does not make you superior. It makes you responsible. Because when you can see what others cannot, you are no longer free to pretend. You must live what you know. You must speak what is true. You must hold your awareness as service, not weapon. The awakened are not chosen. They are called to carry light through darkness, without blinding those still learning to see. You realize that perception is not a privilege, it is a burden and a blessing intertwined. Because once you see through illusion, you can never again seek refuge in ignorance. But neither can you despise the dreamers, for you were once one too. The task is not to judge, but to illuminate. Not to awaken others by force, but to embody truth so deeply that your very existence becomes an invitation. To notice what others can't is both exile and freedom. You will lose the comfort of the crowd, but gain the company of your soul. You will walk paths few dare to tread, but you will never again feel lost. Because once your eyes open, the universe itself becomes your map. Every step, every challenge, every silence, every breath, all of it guiding you home to yourself. You were never meant to fit in. You were meant to see, and through your seeing, to remind others of what they've forgotten, that there is more to this world than what eyes can perceive, that beneath every illusion lies a truth waiting for someone brave enough to notice. So if you feel distant from the world, it's not because you've lost it, it's because you've begun to see it. And those who see cannot go back to sleep. They can only walk forward, awake, aware, and free. And once your awareness has expanded to the point where you can no longer be lulled back into unconsciousness, life begins to reveal dimensions that words can barely touch. The world you once saw as solid, predictable, linear now moves like a living organism, shifting in response to your state of mind. Reality becomes participatory. You start to realize that perception is not passive observation, it is creation. What you see is not merely what's there, it's what you are capable of seeing. This realization changes everything. You no longer interpret life as a sequence of events, but as a dialogue with consciousness itself. Your thoughts are not just private whispers. They are frequencies that sculpt experience. Your emotions are not reactions. They are magnetisms that organize circumstance. The line between inner and outer dissolves. What was once coincidence now feels like choreography. You start to understand what Jung meant when he said, "Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakens." When you truly awaken, you see that the external world was always a mirror, not a prison, but a projection. And once you grasp that, victimhood becomes impossible. You can no longer say, "This happened to me." You can only ask, what part of me is speaking through this? This is not blame, it's ownership. It's the end of powerlessness. Because when you realize that reality is a reflection of consciousness, you reclaim authorship over your own life. And yet, this power does not feel arrogant. It feels sacred. Because you realize that every thought, every intention, every emotion carries weight in the fabric of existence. You start to walk more deliberately. You speak more carefully. You stop using language as noise and start using it as spellwork, understanding that words shape reality because they shape perception. In this state, you develop a kind of spiritual precision. You begin to sense when your energy is scattered and when it's aligned. You notice how the slightest resentment distorts your magnetism, how a single act of integrity amplifies your frequency. You become a scientist of vibration, studying yourself, refining your resonance, tuning your presence like an instrument. You learn that consciousness is not about thinking differently, but vibrating differently. This shift changes your relationship with time. You stop living through memory and anticipation and begin to live through awareness. You understand that the past and future are not destinations, but frequencies both accessible in this present moment. Time becomes fluid, like a fabric you can move through, bend and shape through the intensity of your focus. The more conscious you are, the more time expands. The less aware you are, the faster it slips away. Awareness slows the clock, not by resisting time, but by deepening presence. And this presence becomes your superpower. You start to see how most people exist in delay, always chasing what they've already created through unconscious thought, always reacting to yesterday's energy. But when you live consciously, You begin to create in real time. You stop being behind your life. You start being ahead of it, not through control, but through coherence. You notice that when you are in alignment, everything around you starts to organize itself without force. Problems dissolve before they manifest. Opportunities appear in perfect rhythm. You no longer push reality. You collaborate with it. Effort becomes elegance. Work becomes art. And that's when you realize the universe was never testing you, it was training you. Training you to remember your creative power, to awaken from identification, to return to authorship. The deeper you move into this awareness, the more subtle the tests become. It's no longer about surviving chaos, it's about maintaining coherence in peace. The real challenge is not to stay calm in crisis, but to remain conscious in comfort, because comfort seduces the mind back into sleep. It whispers, "You've arrived." But awareness has no destination. It expands infinitely. Every level of peace reveals a deeper layer of responsibility, the responsibility to live intentionally, to create consciously, to embody truth effortlessly. This is where your perception evolves beyond psychology into mysticism. You stop analyzing energy and start communing with it. You can feel the texture of truth before it takes form. You begin to sense meaning in what others call coincidence, the crow that lands near your window, the song that plays at the right moment, the sentence that echoes in your mind like it came from somewhere else. You realize that existence is communicating with you constantly, but most people are too distracted to hear. The more attuned you become, the more you see that everything is symbolic, that matter itself is myth in motion. You start to decode life as a language of archetypes, patterns, and metaphors. You see how the same stories repeat through history, through relationships, through generations, all echoing the same spiritual architecture. You begin to understand why Jung believed myths were not fantasies, they were blueprints of consciousness itself. You start to live symbolically, not as a poet lost in abstraction, but as a master of meaning. You can look at a single event and read its invisible script. You can sense the lesson hidden inside the chaos. You can feel how every relationship, every challenge, every synchronicity is an initiation, a mirror of your inner evolution. And with that awareness comes a deep humility, because the more you see, the more you realize how vast the mystery truly is. Knowledge stops being accumulation and becomes surrender. Wisdom is no longer something you possess, it's something you participate in. You realize that your intellect was never meant to control the unknown, only to translate its whispers into action. So your actions change. You no longer move from ambition, but from attunement. You no longer chase outcomes. You respond to invitations. You feel when something is meant for you, not because it's easy, but because it feels true. You begin to notice that truth carries a distinct vibration. It may terrify you, but it never confuses you. Falsehood, on the other hand, flatters the ego but drains the soul. So you stop asking, "Is this what I want?" and start asking, "Is this aligned?" That single shift from desire to alignment is the bridge between unconscious creation and conscious evolution. Once you start living that way, your life becomes unmistakably different. You stop moving through the world like a consumer of experience and begin to move like a co-creator of reality. You stop fighting for significance and start embodying it. You no longer need meaning, you are meaning. And that's when you begin to see the true purpose of awareness. Not to separate you from others, but to unify you with everything. Seeing what others can't doesn't make you superior. It makes you responsible for seeing through the illusion of separation. You start to feel the heartbeat of humanity as your own. You realize that the division, the conflict, the fear, it's all collective shadow begging for integration. So you live differently now, not as a detached observer, but as an integrated creator. You act without ego. You serve without martyrdom. You love without possession. You no longer need to shout your truth because your vibration has become your voice. You walk quietly, but everything you touch begins to awaken. This is what it means to truly notice what others can't, to live from the dimension where awareness creates reality, where perception itself is prayer, where every thought is sacred architecture. It's not a gift you flaunt, it's a light you guard. Because when you see the invisible, you carry the responsibility to keep it pure, to protect it from the corruption of ego, from the temptation of superiority, from the illusion of control. So you move through the world unseen but unmissable, a silent force of coherence in a field of chaos. You no longer seek recognition because the universe itself recognizes you. You are no longer waiting to be understood because you finally understand yourself. And perhaps this is the ultimate sign that you've begun to notice what others can't, when you no longer need to explain it. Because truth that must be proven is not yet embodied. The truly awakened do not argue. They emanate. And when you reach that point, when your very being becomes your message, you realize that awareness is not something you have, it's something you are. The rest is silence. The rest is presence. The rest is eternity looking back through your eyes. And then something even deeper begins to unfold. Awareness starts turning inward, not as introspection, but as illumination. You begin to see the architecture of your own consciousness, the structure of perception itself. You notice that even your thoughts have texture, your awareness has depth, and the space between moments carries weight. It's as if the air around you thickens with meaning. Every instant becomes alive, humming with a silent intelligence that was always there, waiting for you to finally notice. At this level, clarity no longer feels like effort. It's not something you do, it's what you are. The mind no longer wrestles with understanding. It simply observes. Observation becomes revelation. You see how every movement of thought tries to claim ownership over life. My idea, my insight, my belief. But from this vantage point, you see that thought is impersonal. It flows through you like wind through trees. You don't think, you are thought through. You don't create meaning, you become a vessel for it. And this realization changes how you hold yourself in the world. You stop confusing identity with essence. You stop clinging to the story of who I am and start resting in the awareness of what I am. Identity becomes costume, something to wear lightly, playfully, purposefully, but never mistake for your skin. This is the freedom that terrifies the ego and liberates the soul, realizing you can play every role but belong to none. From here, perception shifts again. You begin to sense how energy flows between people, how every exchange of words or silence carries direction, either expansion or contraction. You can feel the density of lies, the lightness of truth, the heaviness of unspoken resentment. The room itself speaks to you. You can walk into a space and feel what happened there before a word is said. But instead of reacting to it, you start to tune it like a musician, adjusting the frequency of an instrument. You become aware of your influence, not as control, but as coherence. Your calmness starts reorganizing chaos. Your awareness begins to ripple through others, silently reminding them of what they are. You realize that awakening is not contagious through words, it's transmitted through vibration. Your energy becomes medicine. Your presence becomes permission. You are no longer teaching, you are remembering on behalf of others. This level of noticing awakens a strange new humility, the humility of seeing how infinite the unfolding truly is. Just when you think you've reached the summit of awareness, you realize there is no summit. Consciousness expands in fractals, endlessly, beautifully, without endpoint. And you begin to understand that enlightenment is not a final state, but a rhythm, a continuous blooming, a breathing between knowing and unknowing. In this rhythm, the need to figure life out dissolves. You begin to live more as a question than an answer. You understand that uncertainty is not an obstacle to wisdom, but its womb. The unknown becomes your companion, not your fear. You stop seeking closure and start revering openness. You see that the universe never repeats itself, that each moment is a first edition of existence. At this depth, gratitude changes meaning. It is no longer a reaction to receiving what you want. It becomes a state of reverence for simply being here. You feel awe for the smallest details, the texture of breath, the hum of stillness, the way light falls across a wall. You begin to realize that the sacred was never hidden, only unseen. Every mundane detail begins to shimmer with the extraordinary. Every second becomes a doorway to infinity. And as perception expands, morality transforms. Right and wrong lose their rigidity. You begin to operate from a higher order, not morality by rule, but morality by resonance. You act not because you should, but because it feels true. You don't seek approval, you seek alignment. You stop asking, is this acceptable? And start asking, is this coherent with the deepest part of me? This is the moral compass of the awakened, a quiet integrity that moves from inner authority, not external permission. Now, life begins to test this coherence through paradox. The universe starts sending you situations that challenge everything you think you know. People will misunderstand your silence. Systems will try to pull you back into conformity. The collective will demand that you justify your freedom, but you will no longer bend because you have seen the cost of pretending. You know that betraying yourself to belong is the slowest form of suicide. You would rather walk alone in truth than march together in illusion, and yet you no longer carry the bitterness of rebellion. You are not fighting the old world. You are outgrowing it. You move through it like light through glass, transparent, unbothered, inevitable. You stop trying to change people and start embodying a frequency that does it for you. When someone speaks in fear, you respond from stillness. When they attack, you listen. When they seek to provoke, you simply remain unmoved, unthreatened, unshakable. It's not weakness, it's mastery. You've discovered that the greatest power is not resistance, but non-reaction. Because reaction feeds illusion. Stillness dissolves it. You no longer need to defend truth, you embody it. And embodiment, unlike argument, cannot be refuted. As this stillness matures, creativity begins to pour through you effortlessly. You write, speak, build, and move with a clarity that doesn't come from thought, but from transmission. It's as if the universe itself is using your hands, your voice, your presence as tools of expression. Inspiration no longer feels random. It feels like participation, a dance between awareness and form. You no longer create to be seen. You create because you are alive. And it's here, in this effortless expression, that you rediscover wonder, not the wonder of the naive, but the wonder of the awakened. You see that awareness, when lived fully, is not solemn or heavy, it's playful. The universe, in its infinite intelligence, is not a machine, it's art. Every atom dances, every silence sings. You begin to laugh more. You begin to love more. The intensity that once isolated you now softens into joy. You have realized that seeing what others cannot is not a curse, it's a celebration. Because to see deeply is to love deeply. Awareness and love are not separate. They are the same force viewed from different directions. The more you notice, the more you love. The more you love, the more clearly you see. Vision without love becomes judgment. Love without vision becomes blindness. But together, they form the lens through which the divine experiences itself. And this balance of seeing and loving is the final flowering of perception. You are no longer an observer of life. You are its witness. You don't seek meaning anymore because you've become the meaning itself. You are the consciousness that notices, the love that heals, the silence that holds it all. You have become what you were always meant to be, not someone who escapes the world, but someone who illuminates it. To notice what others can't is not to stand above them. It's to stand among them as light in human form. quiet, unassuming, infinite. And so it happens quietly, without announcement, without ceremonies, a final turning of the soul. You stop looking for revelation because you realize you are standing in it. Life, in its raw and untamed form, becomes your scripture. Every inhale is a verse, every moment a prayer. You no longer chase the mystical because everything is already holy. This is a truth hidden at the end of all, seeking not that you find the light, but that you become transparent to it. You stop trying to hold awareness and start letting awareness hold you. You stop striving for clarity and start dissolving into it. You realize that consciousness is not something you awaken to. It is something that has always been awake, patiently watching your journey through illusion. When this understanding settles, even your desire to stay awake fades. You no longer fear falling back into unconsciousness because you now see that even sleep is part of the awakening. Everything is part of it. The confusion, the mistakes, the detours, the nights of doubt. Nothing was wasted. Every shadow carried a fragment of the light you were meant to remember. And then a strange calm takes root, not the calm of emptiness, but of completion. The kind of peace that doesn't need silence to exist. You can sit in traffic and feel eternity. You can listen to chaos and still hear the stillness beneath it. You can look into the eyes of a stranger and recognize yourself, ancient and familiar, because separation, the great illusion, has finally collapsed. This is what Jung was pointing toward, all along, the realization that the self you were chasing was never lost. It was simply buried beneath everything you thought you had to become. You've peeled back the layers of identity, the masks, the conditioning, and found something vast, luminous, and indestructible. Not a person, not a mind, but a field, the awareness behind all experience. And once you see that, the world stops being an obstacle and becomes a mirror again, but this time the reflection is love. Every person you meet becomes a reflection of your own depth. The ones who challenge you reveal where love still resists. The ones who comfort you show where love already flows. Everything becomes an act of remembering. You begin to live lighter now. You move with grace, not because you try to, but because resistance has left your body. There is no more inner conflict, no more striving to become only the effortless unfolding of what already is. You laugh more easily, forgive more quickly, speak less often, and mean every word. You don't need to prove truth anymore. You are truth embodied, breathing, human, and yet you stay humble because you understand that awakening is not elevation but integration. It doesn't make you special, it makes you whole. You no longer seek to teach others, you seek to remind them. You no longer want to change the world, you want to love it until it remembers itself. Your presence becomes a frequency. You walk into rooms and shift the air without effort. You speak softly, and people listen without knowing why. You radiate calm, and the world slows around you. You don't perform peace, you emanate it. Not because you learned how, but because you remembered you never had to. And in that remembrance, the story completes itself. The one who searched dissolves into the one who sees. The one who struggled dissolves into the one who understands. You have not reached the end. You have arrived at the beginning that never ends. You look out at the world, the noise, the rush, the endless hunger for more, and instead of pity, you feel compassion, because you remember what it felt like to be asleep, to seek truth in everything except yourself. You no longer judge the dreamers. You love them, silently, fiercely, knowing they too will awaken when it's their time. Every soul is on schedule, every eye will open. And so, you live your days not as a teacher, not as a savior, but as a reminder, a living symbol of consciousness embodied in form. You eat, you work, you laugh, you love, but you do it all from a place of unbroken awareness. You have become the bridge between worlds, the human and the divine, the temporary and the eternal, the seen and the unseen. And as the sun sets one evening, a simple, ordinary evening, you feel it again. That same stillness that once frightened you now feels like home. You close your eyes, and there is no separation between you and the wind, the stars, the pulse of existence. Everything breathes as one. You understand now that this was never about becoming extraordinary. It was about remembering the extraordinary nature of being itself. Seeing what others can't was never about seeing more. It was about seeing clearly, seeing without distortion, without fear, without agenda. You smile, not with pride, but with knowing. You whisper to the quiet, I see now. And the quiet whispers back, you always did. That's when you understand the final truth. Awakening is not an event. It's a recognition that the witness, the world, and the wonder have always been the same. And as you stand in that eternal moment, aware, awake, unbound, you finally see. You were never trying to notice what others can't. You were learning to remember what you always could.